I think we haven't got anyone else waiting in the waiting room, so we'll assume it's time to begin. So yeah, welcome to the June meeting of the Sussex Branch. Thank you for joining us. Obviously, we're still online and entirely online, so yeah, thank you for joining us as we still, we're still exploring exactly what works really well for everyone online. Today's session is really for everyone to ask anything IT related, to kind of completely open the floor. You have the combined wisdom of everyone in the committee, and we have some new and recently joined committee members, so it might be helpful to go through a quick précis of some of the skills in the committee, so you've got an idea of the kind of things you can specifically get help with in case that's useful. But equally to everyone in the membership, everyone who's watching, you're completely free to share your answers as well to the questions. So this process, this meeting will last around an hour, and we will have so literally just a chance to ask questions, and we'll go with whatever comes up. This session is being recorded, just so you know, so just by staying on and asking questions, just that's as long as you're okay with that. So yeah, before we go into exactly into the questions, I will ask the committee to really give a very brief introduction, particularly newer members of the committee, but probably everyone, about their domain and their skills, and just to share out quickly your kind of area of expertise within IT. So yeah, I'm not going to jump on anyone specifically, but I am going to leave people to start, and I will get to people if no one says anything.
I'll lead off, Matthew.
Thank you.
So probably the newest of us all here. Perhaps Steve Cummins, about a day behind me, perhaps. Yeah, so I'm a business analyst. Been working in IT, but kind of halfway between IT and the business function as a business analyst for the last almost 20 years. So my knowledge is probably a lot less mature than some on the committee here. So I might not be able to help in some areas, but in the business analyst domain, I'm pretty reasonable. So any questions around that?
All right, Josh. So Josh, as you can see right now, you're clearly looking at me, Josh. I just want to say I've been practicing for you.
Okay.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Interesting.
I don't know. I can answer that question.
Yeah, no,
not my domain. So.
Okay, well, maybe I should go next to the second newest member of the committee then, or maybe the newest member.
Hey,
whatever.
Josh, I was just checking in on you. Haven't spoken to you all day.
Okay, somebody has obviously published this and we're being Zoom bombed. Is this not a private meeting?
It is a private meeting and people should have booked. The one that I noticed just now that came in was Amma Mansu.
Yeah,
yes.
I booked this meeting. I mean, I can exit if you want, but I got an invitation telling me that.
No, perfectly okay, Amma. No,
That's fine.
No, I was talking more about people like Xavier, who don't appear to be terribly interested in computers and information technology.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, right? So I think we might have to remove that one. So
I presume someone has the power to kick these
yes,
people.
Blake, can you do the necessary?
Done.
Let's just hope they don't become
done.
too numerous.
Yes, so that's done now. So hopefully we won't have any more repeats of that. So yeah. So no, please do carry on with the introductions.
Okay, yeah, I'm Steve Holden. I've got over a 50-year career in information technology, latterly specializing in the Python language and web-based systems and distributed computing. So anything network, internet, web related, I'm good on, and also social and community matters.
Lovely, thank you. I'll introduce myself as well, because obviously, there are a lot of new people in the community as well. So, yep. So I'm Matthew. I work with new stuff. Primarily, my technology background is in Microsoft Azure, identity, and quite a lot of new web technologies as well. Google Cloud as well, and that stack. So yeah, and some web dev. That's basically me. Fundamentally, yeah, I work on the more development side of things in terms of product development and new ideas and bringing them about and rapid prototyping and again the social element, a little bit like Steve, and how we do that. Yeah, so that's me. I don't know if Blay or Bob or Brian, you would like to very briefly introduce yourselves and your areas of expertise as well.
Yeah. Oh, go on.
Okay. My background is IT security on a commercial level, working for filthy businesses. And as part of that, I was head of forensics and handled mainly internal investigations to catch people, identify people committing fraud and the like. So that's my background.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Blake, can I just come in there? I've got the list of who's booked. Sanjana has not booked.
Okay.
Do you want me to remove him, Bob?
I think so. I think after that other behaviour, we've got to be quite tough. No book, no let in. Thanks. Sorry about interrupting everybody, but we don't want any more nonsense.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself while you're there?
Yes, I will do that. Definitely, Steve. Keep me on the toes. I've been in IT. I started in IT actually 60 years ago. The bulk of my career before retiring was in management and then in IT directorship through the commercial world and the not-for-profit sector. And since retirement, I seem to have spent my time working for BCS as a volunteer for the last 15 years, ending up as currently Sussex Branch chair. But so I can give both the commercial background to jobs, the not-for-profit sector, and now the volunteering aspect. Blay, over to you.
Ethics is my area. 3 books. I teach ethics to all the computer scientists at Imperial College and the University of Sussex. But I also do a lot of hands-on ethics committee work, so I'm available for consultancy. The reason for the teaching is that ethics work is traditionally done for free because exchange of money would create a conflict of interest. So if that encourages you to call me in on ethical questions, I don't know whether it will or not, really. I often feel that people in the commercial world think that if something's free, it's worthless. But ethics is different.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, everyone. So
Can I just come in after that problem we had earlier? Who is Blue Skies? If they could admit, they're on mute at the moment, so I can't check it against the list of supposed attendees. Could the Blue Skies person unmute themselves and say who they are, please? And if the Blue Skies person doesn't unmute, we assume it's an intruder and we'll delete.
Well, I don't know whether we need to go that far. Blue Skies doesn't appear to have been causing any trouble to date. So as long as nobody's causing trouble, I'm personally quite happy to let them
we can remove anyone if we need to very easily. So
okay, Blue Skies is obviously not known.
So yeah, so but yeah, if we have any problems, we can do that. Cool. Okay. So
introduce myself. So
thank you, Prageeth.
Yeah. So I am based in Guildford, Surrey, and I am with a SME doing research kind of projects with the University of Surrey, and we work in mostly embedded systems and robotics kind of area, and we complement University of Surrey with various technical capabilities. And I had been working in Japan before moving to UK. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
welcome to the meeting.
Yes, thank you very much. Cool. Okay, so so yeah, as I say, this is an opportunity for everyone to ask any questions that they would like and raise anything they would like. So if you have anything, you can either use the raise your hand function, which is, if I remember, is it still under reactions? It is. Okay, as one of the options, or you can simply unmute yourself and start speaking, or you can ask your question in the chat. I suggest the chat rather than the Q&A function, if that's even on. So yeah, just use the chat. So yeah, so ask questions any way you'd like, really. And we'll give a minute or two for anything to come in. Anyone to have any ideas? Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. And then yeah, we'll get going.
Can I get the ball rolling by asking a bit of a philosophical question? So since the 1970s, we've built all these computers and, you know, they've been ever more complex and so on. And we get to the stage now in the year 2021, after what, 50 years of IT, and it's got ever more complicated. And I get all these requests from these old people who don't understand how it works. How do I do this? How do I do that? Now, I appreciate every single individual thing is done for a very good reason, but is it within our power as technologists to do something that's actually simple? Now, I know that's easy to say and very difficult to do, but all these upgrades and all this security and all this sort of thing confuses people. Is there any thought out there about doing something that's accessible by old people or simple people?
Yeah, thank you, David. So yeah, so the question is about accessibility and how we can make services more accessible despite the level of complexity. I can't quite see that, Blay. What does that? What's the? You're muted. You're muted as well.
The Invisible Computer, Don Norman. His thesis is that after 50 years, and that was, yeah. So he's writing it earlier that you shouldn't need to know all the technical details to use computers. You don't need to know Fleming's right-hand rule to use a hairdryer just because it's got an electric motor in it, nor do you need a degree in physics. So why are we making computers so complicated? Of course, not everybody listens.
Well, I think David's got a reasonable point, actually, because if we're going to compare computing to cars, there's the well-known analogy of what cars would be like if Microsoft had invented them rather than Ford. So I have to say, I mean, while my own company, Laughter, we're reliant on our products being easy to use because they're consumed by high school and university students primarily, and we do actually spend quite a lot of money trying to make our products easy to use. But I have to say, it's largely, well, not largely, but it's very definitely a question of diversity. The audience of elderly people is not currently well served because it's not seen as a primary market for the technology products that we have to use. And again, this brings up the question of the digital divide, which other people may be interested in. But yeah, it's a big open area. And I think as technologists, we do have to hold our hands up and say we are not really considering the usability aspects of the technologies that we're introducing anywhere near as closely as we should be doing.
If I were a commercial person, which I'm not, I would think it'd be incredibly stupid to neglect. Well, let's say I would estimate that 3/4 of the disposable income in this particular country is held by people over 50. So to concentrate on selling to the under 50s is to stupidly limit your market. But as I say, I'm not a commercial person.
I agree. There's a big question of accessibility here, and that diversity is part of the picture. I think there's a real challenge here because, you know, the flip side of this is the pace at which we advance and the amount of features that we add and the pressure to add new features. Much of that is internally generated, admittedly. You know, those of us who develop stuff love adding new features more than we like kind of fixing old bugs, I suspect, in many cases. So it's something of a challenge, and the race for more features is not necessarily a good one. For me, the answer is very clear use cases and not muddying use cases, which is one of the really big challenges, because there's these compromises, this lack of clarity in exactly who the stuff we're creating is for and how it's going to be used, the situation it's going to be used, and the context it's going to be used is very often the challenge. And much of software development that I see is really a solution in search of a problem. And actually getting clearer on the problems, doing really good work up front on what problem you're solving and how, on a personal level rather than on a technical level, I think is a really good step towards moving this stuff, making it all a bit more usable, and being clear about who we're serving and who we're not in each implementation.
And I was talking to a good friend of mine today who has got to go to the hospital to have some work done on the hand, so he's having to have a COVID test. The only way they can give him the COVID test results is on his mobile phone, and he's not a person that uses a mobile phone because of the state of his hands. It's that lack of thought. What happens if somebody can't use what the technology is being provided is a regular headache, is how I sense it. And I have to admit, there are sometimes new systems that appear that one has to use, and you just don't know how to tackle them till you have several goes and somebody kindly helps you. So I think there's a failure to think through implementing, not just the design now, but the actual implementing. You know, how do you actually do COVID test results if somebody doesn't have a mobile phone? Is a good example. That's a Harvard one from today. And I think this is where we all are guilty of not thinking it through.
For me, there's something really important in separating the data layer from the presentation layer in this. You know, makes me think of things like headless CMSs and the rise of those, and how we can, you know, we put the data in a standard format, and then it can be consumed through an app, through a voice to text application, or a text to voice application. As long as the data's there and we understand it and we've got a structure for it, we can share it out by whatever means and develop those in a slightly more modular way. So I think there's a big part of this around separating out the data itself, and the way we present it and share it. So yeah, I think that level of accessibility is actually quite scary. Bob, I think the barriers it creates.
I did forget, as they said, and you've got to bring your mobile phone with this on it to be allowed to come into the hospital. So he actually said to us, well, what do I do then? Oh, was the sort of answer he got.
Well, yeah, but that's just simply inadequate planning for the people for whom the product has been designed, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Nobody thought of that small portion of the user community that doesn't have access to digital services.
Actually, can I say some positive things here? Because I think this is a problem that's actually getting better, and it's not that we've spent half a century going downhill on usability. There's a whole discipline called UX, user experience, which of course was generated by commercialization of the web, where it was just a commercial fact of life that if your website was hard to use, people just clicked onto one that was easier. And you know, the archetypal web sales platform is Amazon, where you can buy something literally with one click. Right, it just couldn't be easier.
Yes, but Amazon is actually widely criticized by the user experience community.
Oh yes,
for the way it presents itself on the web.
Oh yes, and certainly could do better. But the thing is, there's a whole discipline of web psychologists working on improving user experience. So that's one way in which things are getting better. Well,
I don't know. Isn't that a bit like saying we've got a whole lot of people digging as a hole, and that's a good thing, whereas in fact, you know, the hole, if people are going to fall down it, is not a terribly good thing. I'm just wondering if their work is being well directed enough.
I remember having a conversation with a phone conversation, ironically, with the leading web designer, this is many years ago, this is back in the early days in the 90s, for a major British telecommunications company, if I can say that without giving anything away. And when I pointed out that, you know, .img was not very helpful, particularly if you had to click on it, for someone using a screen reader, he calmly said to me, the web is not for blind people. End of story. And I think that's something that's changed. I mean, a lot of blind people have campaigned, and now, you know, any good website is usable by blind people. So I actually think we're making progress on this. And I was quite interested in what Matthew said about the pressure to add features possibly being internally generated, because I suspect it is actually. I mean, we could discuss where does the pressure to add features rather than make things usable come from.
Maybe if I could add on, I think the complexity in computers or the usability in computers come from the multi-purpose or one size fits all kind of thinking that goes on. Obviously now the system is commoditized so that everybody gets a standard system which they use for communication, word processing, as a music player, and so on and so on. So everything adds complexity. So, and as somebody has pointed out, if there is a specific use case, then the usability could be improved. And so I would see it rather like a single machine being used for a number of activities, adding layers of complexity and reducing usability.
It feels like there's a just because we can, we should to a lot of this. You know, the I forget whose law it is that every piece of software expands until it contains an email client. But it's someone's law, and there feels like you know, that this relatedly, actually, one of the things that I find most frustrating in my work is the way that the commercial, to meet some of the commercial needs or as a perceived, it's very vendors seem very keen to silo everything, and when we create stuff, it's all kind of locked in, and it's very hard to create relationships between different applications that do different things, rather than actually being able to access that data freely. And even where you've got web applications with APIs, often they're very limited, or buying the API is you have to spend a fortune to get API access, and anyone kind of not negotiating directly with the vendor doesn't get access. And that leaves us making it kind of, it almost creates this incentive to make these generalist applications that don't do anything terribly well, rather than specializing. And I'd much rather see how we access this stuff being a lot more granular, and actually being able to work within an application ecosystem rather than in trying to be that whole ecosystem. To me, feels a much more sustainable way to develop something that does have a specific use case and a nicely held, focused use case.
Got a question in my mind is, what should each of us do differently to try and improve the usability that's coming out as a key aspect? You know, what's the thing we'll do differently regularly for the next 6 months to make a difference? Anybody want to take that challenge?
I'll take the challenge. You know, as a business analyst, these kinds of meetings help me as well, right? Because it helps to build other perspectives that might not be around. I work in pensions and annuities, so you know, my main client are the older generation as well. So we've always got to be in that mindset, and you do find in the business that you've got young administrators administering these policies, and they're giving you the requirements to take through to the client, but they don't really understand, and they don't really understand the needs, right? So and you do get these, oh, let's build an app, let's put this onto a mobile phone, and you look at the analytics, and most people aren't approaching us through the mobile phone. You look at the pensions websites, most people aren't actually even that engaged in the website either, and they're probably going to just read a member benefit statement, and there's this big challenge to kind of get out there and engage, but you know, we go about it all the wrong way around. We don't really engage with the people. We're thinking about it from our own perspectives, and that's fundamentally, I think, the biggest flaw that we have. And again, this is why I join meetings like this, and this is why this really excites me, because it does open up my eyes to that, and this isn't the only one that I join. You know, the more perspectives you get, the wider you can kind of think and put yourself in someone else's shoes. But you know, that's no substitute to actually understanding and actually asking the question of that person: does this work for you? So you know, yeah, I think, yeah, I'll take the challenge. I mean, it's what I do as a role. So
well, okay, as a business analyst, I mean, my attitude is perhaps a little more cynical, but we have to ask ourselves for whose benefit the technology is actually ultimately being deployed. And my classic complaint about technology in that sense is the automated answering system. You know, your call is important to us. That's why we can't be bothered to pay anyone to actually answer your call when it comes in. So you're talking to a machine instead. Thank you.
Great. And then it cuts you off because the officer.
Oh well, we won't even go into the various AVR problems that can come up.
I think this relationship between clear business process and IT is a really important one, and often overlooked. I think it's almost feels that the two domains are treated as broadly separate, which is an interesting one. And I think, you know, for certainly for large organizations, the interfaces that they give their staff are just as important for the end user experience as the interfaces that they actually present to end users. I've had a difficult experience with a well-known broadband provider in this country, one of the larger challenger providers, whose support staff are very clearly following a script, and it's a very badly written script, and have no latitude to break out, no training, and will take you down the same loop over and over and over again. Which is an immensely frustrating experience. And had I not had the background that I have, I would have probably ended up utterly confused, rather than utterly frustrated and escalating the complaint. But those issues and how you deal with that process is just as important, and that the two things mesh as well. You know, it's got to be, we want as much self-service in people's hands as possible, but when that fails, we want to handle that failure elegantly too, and hand that off to a person who can deal with an exception well and is given the right tools. And I think how we think about that is really challenging. And for me personally, I think the challenge is choosing tools that aren't taking me in the wrong direction. And I think there's a UI element to this, and a broader business process element to this, and a doing things for expediency's sake element to this, and rather than doing things properly.
Well, if I might cynically suggest another element, people cost money. People cost money, and so we are forced to deal with automated systems because companies would rather invest in automated systems that gave a substandard level of service than actually employ people who would cope as we would like to be coped with by receiving personal service. And it's a known problem. I don't know what the solution is, but it's kind of the race to the bottom, isn't it, in some ways?
I think for me, there's a big part of this that's actually around more empowerment of frontline staff and putting some digital tools in people's hands. And there's, for me, there's this, I have a great deal of difficulty with this hard line between kind of consumer of systems and services and designers and creators of systems and services. And actually, when we put more of the options in people's hands, we want to present people with good defaults, but we also want to allow them to tweak things to meet their own needs. And very often, certainly one of the attitudes that I've always struggled with and often found myself pushing against is that really that we know best about people's use cases and people's needs as IT professionals, and working with a bit more humility and accepting that actually maybe we don't know everything about this person's needs in this circumstances. It is a difficult thing to deal with, but equally is actually very liberating once you let go of it.
Well, we should consider ourselves a service industry, basically, is what you're saying, and that's very true. We're all driven by the requirements of the people who pay for the systems we build.
I think I used the example earlier of the COVID tests. One, I was thinking through some of the stuff that I have to deal with here. Electricity suppliers have this sales pitch now that they will put in a computer that means they can automatically read the meter. Well, of course, that doesn't apply. And we've got 3 electricity supplies coming onto the site. 2 can work automatically, the 3rd one can't. So I have to go and read that meter every 3 months. And the water board supplies, they haven't even thought about technology, but they expect you to go and grovel outside on the verge, find the old-fashioned steel manhole, get it up, read the meter and tell them. And I think what we've got, and I use those examples which affect particularly the electricity one, Joe Public generally, large millions of people. We're not thinking through the human interface with even the more basic systems. And, I think that's where we're falling down as a profession, because in a sense, we are generating these systems.
Well, unintended consequences also applies. A case that came up in my own organization a while ago. We've had a web system for a long time, and this is an internal interface. And Matthew was saying we don't even build our own internal systems terribly well. So when we were a small company, we built a website, and there was a page upon it where you could select any of the current licenses, and you could perform certain operations on them. And this all worked very well. And when I joined the company, which was I think about 7 years or 8 years old at the time, one of the problems that I had to deal with was complaints about how unresponsive and slow this page was. And I discovered that it had been written when we had less than 100 licenses and done good service for quite a long time. But now it had got up to the stage where we had about 78,000 licenses. And so before this page could actually display, it was reading all the way through the complete license collection to get the license, just to get the license numbers. And nobody had thought to optimize that access with a database index or anything like that. So, I mean, this is just the kind of mistake that's made because we can't see 10 years into the future when we design systems until we've been designing systems for long enough to make all the stupid mistakes that inevitably people do make if they haven't been doing a job long enough.
Great, thank you. I really like to. I don't want to. We've kind of been exploring a single question, and actually, I really like David shared another question in the chat there, which if we can move on to, perhaps it would be interesting to explore, which is of perhaps more broad interest, which is more social interest. So yeah, is Bitcoin ethical and desirable and safe? I think this is a very interesting one. So I'll leave that to, maybe we can start with Blay and the ethics angle would be a good place to start.
Well, the ethics often goes straight back to the technology. I would say definitely not, because the mining and calculating uses an inordinate amount of electricity. I've heard various estimates, and I think they are guesstimates, but it's using way too much electricity. But whenever I bring this up, and there is an all-party parliamentary advisory group on cryptocurrency, actually, and the government's quite enthusiastic about cryptocurrencies. The standard response from people from Barclays and so on is, yes, well, that's Bitcoin. There are better ways to do it. We can do it by proof of work, which is much less computationally intensive. So that's the thing. The other ethical question that I sometimes bring up is that bad people do bad things with Bitcoin. And we know that it is convenient for criminals. But the standard response I get to that is bad people, do things with US dollars. What do you think arms dealers deal in? So that's not an argument against Bitcoin. So I'm sorry to be the typical ethicist. You have to decide. My feeling is, I would like to see Bitcoin go, mainly because of its environmental impact. Technologically, it's not satisfactory, and that in itself, to me, is unethical. Have I said enough? I wonder what other people think.
Can I just summarise that in my own mind? You think it's unethical because it's using up too much electricity, and secondly, it allows more bad people to do more bad things.
The jury's out on it allows bad people to do bad things, because you could argue that any currency does that, and that's bad people drive up and down the A27. That's not an argument for closing the road, but it has been misused, and I think yes, I would consider Bitcoin as undesirable. Although I would give a cautious approval to cryptocurrency. There's a lot of good things about cryptocurrency in general. It's just Bitcoin is a particularly poor instantiation. But this is just my opinion. It'd be interesting what other people think.
Yeah, as it was sort of aimed jointly at Blay and me, a couple of weeks ago there was the police raided what they believed to be a cannabis factory in somebody's house. And in reality, it had nothing to do with drugs, or it may have done, but it was a Bitcoin mining facility. And they got it because of the sheer volume of power that was being consumed. So as probably as the first, or at the very least one of the first cryptocurrencies, then it's kind of outgrown itself, I suspect. It will never, however badly it is abused, it will never be as bad as cash, which has been every criminal's currency of choice, US dollar, pound, anything, because as soon as it's in fold-in money, it's difficult to trace. The beauty of non-cash transactions from a government point of view and a law enforcement point of view is that they're generally traceable. The big problem with Bitcoin is it's very hard to keep track of it. And I suspect that that is one of the biggest downsides from a law enforcement and a government point of view. The beauty of traditional online funds is that the taxman can track them and therefore they can be taxed. Cash is terrible. Bitcoin is probably no better because it can suddenly become anonymized. And I suspect that the answer will be to have a cryptocurrency that is secure, but not too secure. And therefore more environmentally friendly. That's my input.
I have a question really related to the taxability of cryptocurrency versus the taxability of fiat currency, and given how little tax large tech multinationals pay, it's an interesting question to see where, and that's not a criticism of the comment. It might make it harder if we did move to crypto, but like it seems like that's a pre-existing challenge. There's something there that's potentially solvable with distributed ledger actually, but isn't immediately kind of fixed one way or the other, and it's not the root of the problem somehow. It's this there's something different going on that underlies Bitcoin. It feels like, for me, there's a change going on that underlies Bitcoin that's related to moving towards notional values of, notional value rather than kind of concrete value, and related to now not even moving to kind of national value, which is actually what currencies were based on since everyone left the gold standard. Was basically like, do we trust this country? Was this fundamental measure, and it seems to be moving to something else, or some range of other things. And I'm interested in what's emerging. And things like the rise in NFTs seems to be a huge, big thing this year. Been loads of kind of artworks, or in the very loosest sense, actually, published as released as these non-fungible tokens.
If anyone can explain to me why people spend good money on non-fungible tokens, I will have considered this. I'll consider this evening well spent.
Because other people do.
Well, yeah, but that underlines what you were saying, though, doesn't it? That notions of value are changing.
Mm. Mm. And that shift to no intrinsic value, purely social value, no material value, is a really, really interesting one, and a difficult one for us to navigate socially.
How are we going, Matthew, on the questions?
That's it for questions in the chat. If anyone else has anything else they'd like to raise, we can explore, or we can explore this one further. I think there's potentially some very interesting stuff in that one. But yeah, or we can take a different tangent. It'd be helpful to hear from people what would be most useful. A few people watching live, or actually also committee members, anything that you'd like to follow up or you'd like to ask, if anyone's got anything else. Otherwise, we can carry on riffing on this for a little bit longer.
I think we've touched on what is, I sense, to me, being one of those of more mature years nowadays. Trouble, you can't stop growing older. Basically, is that systems we're getting are not good and easy to use for those. We've already touched on it tonight, but I do think we've got, I think it was Blay who said, the disposable income is in the 50+ group. The older half of that group we're failing to engage with as a profession by provision. And there's a real, it's not going to disappear in 1 or 2 years. It's probably another 20 years before it works out the system. So I think my question to everybody is and I've already said in another, well, what do we do about this? Do we get back to getting those that have retired and can do it, setting up informal workshops for those that are needing help? What is the change? What do we as a branch do? To me, we do need to do things to help people.
Mm.
Actually, Bob, I like the idea of informal workshops. It would be something as a branch that we could certainly consider. I'm going to second that proposal anyway. See what everybody else thinks. Just a drop-in session for older people to help with IT-related problems.
Well, unfortunately, if you're trying to reach people with IT problems, electronic communications are probably not the best way to do it.
or it gives us a nice, neat place to start.
Well, indeed, yeah, that's also true. But yeah, digital outreach is difficult through digital means.
Yeah.
But if you listen, you can hear where the problems are.
Yeah. I mean, it's fair to say that the individual older people like me may have difficulty with technology, but they tend to be represented by a growing number of charities and groups who are vocal. And perhaps the answer is to do the digital outreach to those organizations, Age UK, the Help the Aged.
You've already captured those markets.
Yeah. And then they can communicate through their channels and come back with the real issues that people face. I mean, I
Is that
recently
being done at BCS level at all? Do we know?
I don't know. Bob may know.
Yeah, I'm going to answer in two parts. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing BCS is doing on that type of inclusion or lobbying or anything. And I was also relating it back to here. We're in a village and rural area in East Sussex, and there is no, I'm not aware, and I've been here, 8.5 years, and got to know a lot of the people. There's no organisation like Age UK or anybody operating in the area to try and help those of mature years. You know, I think a lot of the people are just basically left high and dry.
I think relatedly, there's actually quite an important area that we can work in all of the more technologically naive communities that we might connect with, which is about how you evaluate the offers that are made to you on a technical basis, because actually I think that is one of my biggest areas of concern. Actually, in the clients that I work with who are less technical, is choosing the right thing, how you choose the right thing for you in this domain. So it's like, how do I choose so I don't end up spending a fortune on whatever it is that I'm offered, so I don't end up ending up in a broadband contract that doesn't work for me, so I don't end up in, you know, or I don't end up spending £1,000 on a smartphone I don't need, or all of those things. So actually it's not just a case of using the thing once I've got it, it's a case of how do I choose well to start with? What are the questions I should ask? How do I explore this as a domain? And I think that's actually at least as valuable in terms of what we can offer, because how-to guides are available. Like what I should do guides, far less available, far harder to do, but it's actually something we're in a position to do. And I'd just like to add my kind of support for this and relate it back to the cryptocurrency question. Actually, you know, there's a real risk that we technically marginalize people on really fundamental levels. And what comes up for me is thinking about Sweden and its move towards cashless society. I don't know if you happen to know, but Sweden is well ahead of the curve in terms of moving towards an almost entirely cashless society, which has all sorts of benefits in quite a cohesive society. But those who have already, those even in Sweden who have dropped between the cracks, particularly homeless people, have had a hell of a time because they no longer have access to cash and they can no longer beg. And that has been a huge, you know, however desirable you may see that as a presence, some people rely on that to stay alive, and however you may choose to address that. And those people have been further marginalized by the move to cashless. So there are all sorts of kind of, as we change technology, I think beholden on us is helping those who are left behind in some way, and helping those who are confused and who are open to exploitation because of that. And so, yeah, I completely support that. And I think finding a group we can pilot this and work with would be a really great step. Cool. Okay. Does anyone have any more questions or anything they would like to ask? We're coming up to nearing the end. So if there's anything quick that you'd like to get in, good chance to speak now, or perhaps any feedback about the session and how useful you found it.
Just very briefly, I'm interested in that debate that we're having about ease of use. It seems to me it works on two levels. One is the particular application that I want to use, is that easy for an old person, but also stepping back from that, the operating system and all the applications with it. And maybe there's a solution that says, here's an operating system that's easy and it doesn't update and security and all the time, and it's only got 4 applications on it. It's email, Tesco's shopping, I don't know, and 2 others. That's it. That's all you've got. And as an old person, that's limited, but it fits your basic needs. And because it's fitting the basic needs, it isn't complicated. Just an idea.
And 3 buttons to call the people you talk to most.
Yes.
Yes. It looks like a market opportunity. I wonder why people aren't tempted into it.
Yes.
I think largely it's to a very significant degree, it's actually a market opportunity that the iPad fills. You know, there are further and harder use cases, but actually for the kind of technically moderately literate, that's a large part of it.
I think the setting up of it, I'm thinking of 2 people. One where somebody's gone in who is a technician and set up his PC with sort of the 4 set things on it, you know, how to order the food, how to do the email, create a letter, etc. And he can live quite happily. He's within that domain of those 4 things, job done. And that's the sort of need that there is for these older people, more mature people.
Yes,
Yeah,
again, doesn't it need some mediation to get the devices configured for the people? It's not so, I mean, yeah, if you talk to any of the large telecom and network suppliers, for example, their primary ambition is to remove the truck stop. You know, they don't want to send a truck out to somebody's home to actually do wiring. They want to do everything automatically without involving people. Whereas surely when you're talking about the needs of individuals with particularly individuals with difficulties, then they are going to need a level of personal service, which it seems at the moment very few organizations are set up to provide.
I think if putting your finger absolutely on the key point there are not organizations, not many, set up to provide it, Steve.
For some of my career, I've worked in that gap around accessibility. So it's absolutely a gap and worked for service providers to deliver things. When I very first started my career, I worked with a gentleman who'd had, in his 70s, who'd had a stroke and had very little short-term memory, had to use email, had to learn to use email as part of his part of what he was doing. And there was no way without external support that would have worked. But eventually we got him there. And I think there is also, for me, there's also a part way there. There's the high touch stuff, but there's also a way to spread this out. And there's something for me around publishing recipes. I think recipes as a metaphor is a really interesting one. Like, how do we do this? How do we think about this? Give people some practical steps in an order that they can do to do things that are a bit less task orientated and a bit more general. But yeah, there's definitely all sorts of rich stuff to play with.
Well, in traditional communities, of course, you know, old women and men would have written songs about how to do it.
Yes. And I think there is that's another really important point. There is actually really important stuff to learn from working with people who are excluded in whatever way, because they have a valuable perspective. They have contributions to make back to the stuff that we deliver, and good design, stuff that makes it easier for a specific group, tends to be really good design for everyone. Yeah, cool. Okay. I think there's a question for us to take away as a committee to think about this and some suggestions. So there's definitely some stuff to follow up on. Thank you all very much for that. If everyone's happy, I'll move on to just a quick preview of next month's meeting. So we are going to be meeting at 7 p.m. on the 14th of July, and that's one of our special meetings. We will have the prize-winning students from Sussex University. So this branch sponsors student prizes within the computer science departments at Sussex and at Brighton. And this July will be the presentation from, is it 2 prize winners, Bob? I just checked.
It's 5, up to 5. Well, up to 5 can present. We give 5 prizes.
Okay.
The prize is a year's membership of BCS for them. So we are trying to bring them into BCS.
Right.
And the reason it's only Sussex at this point is purely that Brighton are further behind because of COVID in making their decisions. And hopefully we will hear from the Brighton students in October.
Excellent. So
it really does, can I say, we've had some incredible projects presented. the creativity of this student generation is quite amazing.
And I was going to add, yeah, that we've had all sorts of wide-ranging topics, and we don't actually know what the topics will be until shortly before, because it depends on who wins and who will speak for us. But we've had talks about applying artificial intelligence, some really deep kind of details of computational algorithmic stuff, some really quite high-level UX and game design, some interesting stuff around VR. So the students are really, really good at picking up exciting, interesting developing areas. So it's well worth turning up, and I found it really kind of stimulating, interesting talks, all of them, even if they weren't directly in my space, in the space that I could apply. So yeah, I really do recommend coming to that one. I think it's really, really good. So yeah, and that will be available on Eventbrite shortly, so you can sign up there. And yeah, so yeah, that's on 7 p.m. the 14th of July, which is always, as always, following our normal rule, which is the second Wednesday of the month. That's correct, isn't it? Yep. So yes, brilliant, lovely stuff. Does anyone else have anything they would like to add before we wrap up the meeting? Lovely. Well, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for coming along and for the questions. And yeah, I hope to see you at another meeting soon. Thanks very much. That's us done.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.